Hello everyone, I am back at the Hawthorne Collection at the University of British Columbia for another episode of Ethics and Fly Fishing. In the last episode, we took a bit of a turn from the introductory definitions that we began with and began a discussion of the distinction between aesthetics, a theory of beauty, of art on the one hand, and of ethics on the other. I use two kind of characters to think about that, namely the aesthetical approach of a recent guest on the River Rambler podcast, Nick Carroll, and what I called an almost mystical approach or justification for his approach to fishing for steelhead, dry flies and dry lines. And Adrian Cortez's approach, which is in some sense identical. I would say the biggest difference is Carroll, as I understand it, uses a graphite rod and Cortez uses bamboo or cane rod. But his position, or the way he articulates his position, being a bit more personal and not making any demands upon other anglers' practice. Harrington, as I talked about it, was kind of a middle figure, a transitional figure between the two. Emerging from that discussion is a basic question, which is essentially, can there be morally superior ways to fish? Are there ethical and even aesthetical preferences that can be made in the more in a stronger way that would apply to everyone, that everyone should strive for? Or are these all simply within the domain of personal choice? This may seem at an oversimplified level to put Cortez in a kind of relativist camp where he's just doing what he likes, but you do what you like, and Carroll in a more dogmatic position of everyone should do things this way. But I don't think actually that quite applies to either of those positions. By way of another example, I just read an essay today in Swing of the Fly magazine that was a bit of an argument on behalf of the click and paw reel, the old Hardy clickers, and the absence of a modern disc drag reel. I think the essay was in the same vein of the discussion, that it was making an aesthetical and you could even argue perhaps ethical case for the use of these clearly less popular, less productive, more prone to certain kinds of failure reels. Now, I think we could have this discussion in a number of ways on a number of subjects, all within the realm of fly fishing, including double-handed rods and what's called the spey style of fishing. But the larger question still looms, which is, can a person make ethical and beyond that aesthetical demands upon another person? Are there superior ethical and aesthetical forms of fishing to one another? While it's an unpopular position in some ways to take, I think we have to admit that it's kind of obvious, I think, that there are morally superior ways to fish to others. We have laws that regulate our fishing practices, not only because of the interests of the state or because of the enforcement of state agents, but largely those laws, I think, reflect a consensus viewpoint that there are morally superior ways of fishing that should be promoted, and morally inferior forms of fishing that should not be promoted, and in fact should be punished. When someone poaches, when someone litters, when someone fishes in a way that is destructive to the fish or to the environment, even in some case you could say to themselves, I think we're within our legitimate rights to say that those forms of fishing are inferior to forms of fishing that do not inflict those kinds of harms to the environment or to the fish, to the resource, or to ourselves. Likewise, based on that, which I think is a fairly common sense view, it doesn't strike me as ridiculous to entertain the question of, well, how far up can we go from these kind of baseline agreed upon harms, poaching, for instance, and breaking the law, to this other end where we're talking about disc drag reels versus click pawl reels, dry flies versus wet flies, fly fishing versus gear fishing, those kinds of things. I admit that it's fairly easy to make the argument for moral superiority whenever you're working from poaching as your kind of bottom floor. It's easy to get over that hurdle. It's a lot harder, I think, to get over some of these hurdles of, can a fly fishing rod be said to be not only technically better, but aesthetically better? I think a lot of us can say, okay, matter of taste, ethically better. I mean, that's hard. Those are hard arguments to make. I actually think it's interesting and even potentially worthwhile to see how far we can get from sort of don't poach, poaching fishing is bad, morally inferior, to legal fishing, which comparatively at least is good, morally superior. I'm interested as an ethicist and also as an angler to not sort of stop there. Haig Brown, as I shared with before, also believed we should hold ourselves to higher standards than the law articulates. But obviously that doesn't mean that the rule of law and its basic moral function is not relevant either. But I am interested in kind of raising the bar and seeing how far we can go. The question for me is, what are the limits, or what are the reasons why we might want to slow down as we move through our analysis or our consideration of ethics and aesthetics in fishing? And I think there is one pretty major obstacle to keep in mind, which is the obstacle of freedom. When the obviousness of certain moral realities and the fact that one can determine some baseline sense of moral excellence and superiority to forms of degradation and moral inferiority, that doesn't necessarily give you a license to accelerate those claims as far as you can go, especially whenever that acceleration begins to inhibit other goods. And I think here the good of personal choice and the good of freedom has both moral and aesthetical value that deserves massive consideration. There is something equally moral, I would say, about giving a certain amount of freedom once one has cleared some of these maybe lower moral barriers, where issues do become perhaps aesthetical in a way that they're not explicitly moral or ethical, but that can nonetheless develop through human creativity and freedom, and also through the realities dictated by the environment and the resource, by ecology, by nature, to yield a perhaps much higher plane of moral reality, where freedom is respected, as are the determinant factors of the environment, and so on and so forth. And so, just because I don't think that willy-nilly moral relativist and even aesthetical relativist position is tenable for the basic facts of like poaching is bad, I don't think that this justifies a kind of prescriptive dogmatism, a kind of fundamentalism on these things. But I am tempted to explore, how much bandwidth we can find between those things, and whether there are even on the edge cases exceptions to the rule, that kind of magic, mystical idea is similar, I think, in scope to the transgressions of poaching and things, on that side of the bar. And so I'm interested in the whole spectrum. I just don't think we should flatten it out too easily. We shouldn't become presumptuous or intellectually prideful that we figured it all out. But it is, I think, something that's both worthy of consideration for just sheer intellectual pleasure, but also probably deserves some scrutiny and some thought by anglers who want to devote themselves to the art and sport of fishing for reasons that go beyond either a desire to feed oneself or a desire for generic hobby pleasure, stuff like that. I think there are those people, I would consider myself one of them, who are invested in fishing for reasons that invite this kind of scrutiny and maybe invite this kind of depth of thought and analysis, and those arguments aren't just my own. I see them echoed across the archive of books, and I think within BC, Haig Brown is still the most authoritative voice on these matters, but there's certainly others as well. So that's just a continuation of the last episode. And the episode to come, I think I'm going to reflect a bit on the fact that I just came from the Spayclave, the Michael and Young Spayclave, and I'm headed to Speyorama, SOR, in San Francisco this weekend. I'm not participating, I'm just there to view. I may live stream from it. If anybody's interested in me doing that, I can try and provide a little bit of access there. But I definitely want to think in particular about what we might call the aesthetics of casting, the function of casting, and whether or not there's room for an ethical consideration there, whether there's a moral purpose to that. I'm by no means an authority in that, but I can at least comment from what I have observed and the little that I know and am able to do in my own casting. But largely I'm going to rely upon people like Tim Arsenault and Travis Johnson and Bruce Kroc and my buddies who are better the casters than me, which is all of them, I'd say, and all the people I see in the pool this Saturday and Sunday in San Francisco. So if you have any questions about that or about what I've said earlier, any criticisms, any suggestions, feel free to chime in. And I hope you all are having a wonderful spring season. I have also been on the water a bit, also been on the Vice, and all things considered, things are really good. And I think this year is shaping up for just really wonderful days ahead on the water, and I hope the same is for you. So thanks for listening.